The government's duty is to further reduce irreparable harms to society, no matter which group it is, unless opposition proves to us how maintaining these sports are like absolutely necessary to the extent that it justifies long-term harms. We win this debate. Proud to propose. First, some setup. Two pieces of framing. First, what does the status quo look like? We tell you that combat sports have a high audience count and the regulations and safety rules are enforced, but this looks like better helmets, first aid care, etc. And the main goal of these sports is like the profit incentive of the organizations. So they try to maximize things such as shock value or like flashy things and harms to the head. B. Athletes are people who do competitions as a living. This looks like long-term martial arts, like being a full-time MMA like player, and their main goals are to incapacitate opponents most of the time. So then, what does the ban look like? We tell you that a blanket ban over combat sports do allow self-defense practice, but martial arts as public shows are completely banned. Then, what will happen to major brands, for example, like MMA or boxing? We support the transition, for example, like looks like transitioning into self-defense trainers and helping transition into other athletics. And even if backlash does happen, we are willing to trade this off. Then, moving on to our first argument, what's our premise? This causes irreparable physical and mental harms to athletes, and there's principle duty to some extent. Why is this true? Two structural reasons. First is on the legitimate physical harms. We tell you that the game itself, a majority of it is meant to be entertainment, right? Meaning that the athletes slash the organization's main incentives is to provide best entertainment because their incentive is pay, right? We tell you that because of this, like the organizations and the athletes themselves try to prioritize things such as shock value. Thus, total safety is often ignored or often negligible in some of these situations. And since the main instinct of fans they don't want to see safer boxing, rather they will want to see players getting violently knocked out because the audience, we tell you that it is intrinsically funner to see like people getting knocked out like harshly rather than like safe boxing, right? Second, then what will happen? As a harsher ways of fighting, this looks like incapacitation of opponents because, as we already framed, a majority of these athletes are long-term players, meaning that there's a higher risk of like bone-crushing injuries. And even if it's not, we tell you that there's a higher risk of long-term injury. This looks like CTE, etc., right? Because we tell you that this type of harm is not accidental, but instead it is like an intended outcome from like the structural way of how these sports work in the first place. Meaning that even when like the harms aren't like notice like immediately, we tell you that constant history head will like at the end of the day lead to like long-term irreversible harms such as CTE. Then our second mechanism on why the ban is like overall justified. Our principle is that A, there's the government duty to ban irreversible harm, but as our second speaker will expand later, like if drugs are banned and if cockfighting is banned due to like the irreversible harm it causes to society, we ask side opposition why isn't there a government duty to then mitigate further harms on individuals because this type of harm is not accidental but is again structurally caused due to profit incentives of like major organizations, right? As our second speaker will expand more on this, we tell you that there's a higher likelihood that the industry is corrupt. For example, like overpaying sponsors, like focusing a lot on like the fan main incentives due to profit, which is why there's like a higher likelihood that like there's like intended irreversible harm instead of just accidental harm. Second, on how this sets a better precedent. When ultra-violent combat sports are banned, this sets a better precedent because other sports, such as like ice hockey or like American football, it will be committed to like safety and less on the pure shock value because they know that because they know that if they try to prioritize shock value, then a very similar thing can happen to them, which we tell you is not in the best interest of those groups overall. So then, what are the impacts? We justify the ban for the protection of people in the long term and setting a better precedent for other sports such as like ice hockey or football and less on the shock value, which at the end of the day, like leads to the fact like expands societally because since safety is a societal issue, like families bear emotional and financial burdens, and healthcare systems bear medical costs. And we tell you that at the end of the day, we tell you that at the end of the day, it is like justified to ban these sports in order to like reduce the legitimate physical harms and to highlight the government's duty overall. Therefore, so proud to propose.
So, does the government have the authority to do this? Of course not. Even if the sport is extremely dangerous or fatal, it is the athlete's choice to pursue this passion. It is the athlete's passion and drive that incentivizes them to go face forward into dangerous situations like this, whether even with knowing the dangers and the risk that it has. It is ultimately the athlete's choice what they want to pursue in their life and how they want to use their life. If this is truly a risk that the athlete is willing to take, I believe we as we as side opposition believe that the government has no right to invade that right. So government wants to use time and energy to prioritize the transition of groups like WWE and MMA. However, instead of using time and energy for things like this, there are more big problems in the world that the government could be focusing on, such as healthcare and things like this. The truth is that that in the status quo there isn't that big of a problem. WWE and MMA, the injuries caused by things like that are mostly cared for because they have a lot of funds and they have a lot of money to care for these people, and ultimately in most cases and in nearly all the cases they get proper care, which lets them actually which means that in most cases it's actually extremely rare that these people will actually have permanent damage. Now moving on to my final refutation, the government side only focuses on the athletes when this debate is truly about how it affects society, because ultimately these athletes only make up about like 1% of all the people on the world. Ultimately, the size of these people is just evidence towards the fact that that is not what this debate is. The right to pursue passion. So these athletes have the right to pursue their passion, whether it be through fighting or other sports. If these passions do not violate or invade others through foul play, anything that prevents these people from pursuing their passion would go against the principle of the right to pursue their passion. So the likelihood analysis of this is that sports such as boxing, wrestling, and sumo wrestling are a high-risk sport. If someone didn't have that much passion in these sports, they would either quit or go in low-risk environments, right? So that's just so now that I've proved that all these combat athletes are dedicated and passionate in the sport, why would a ban go against their passion? This is kind of obvious, right? Banning them from doing what they love, banning them from doing what they have passion in, this is just gonna stop them from actually doing what they want, doing what they chose to do, and doing what they feel their life was meant for. Now, something like this not only applies to fighting sports, but also sports in general, which moves directly into my second mechanism, government overpowering. So the government is a very powerful system. If the government bans something so mainstream, such as all combat sports, this empowers the government. So why is this bad? When the government is empowered, it feels that it has the authority and the right to take away other rights, such as banning other dangerous sports. So then the likelihood analysis of this is that on the surface, these combat sports, right, they're dangerous, right? And then government even said that the government has a duty to ban all dangerous sports. However, all sports have some sort of danger. So now because government banned these combat sports, they now feel the obligation to ban all extremely dangerous sports. These sports include things like football and rock climbing and even more. So now the impact of this is that now the players will lose their passion and stop pursuing them. The government is overpowered and feels the obligation to keep enforcing rules such as these, and ultimately there will be backlash from society. So now moving on to my comparative, regardless of if there's a ban, the sport will continue to exist. Most of these passionate combat athletes will go and do the sport illegally for some cash. Therefore, the ban is useless. So what is better? Fighters pursuing their passions legally, or artists that pursue passions illegally and then get punished for fighting for their right? On top of this, the government will face backlash, which will ultimately put them in an even worse state than before. Now, for these reasons, I'm more than ever proud to oppose. Thank you.
When you hear the word KO, what comes to your mind? It's probably a roaring crowd shouting in support of their favorite MMA fighter. We on government want to stop martial arts and self-defense from turning into pure public entertainment without value. Opposition comes up to the podium and tells us that we do not have the authority to do this governmental change, and that this is about the athlete's choice. First of all, as this motion is a policy motion, meaning we have a certain amount of fiat to enact laws and policy, this simply does not make sense. It's against the spirit of the motion for opposition to claim that our policy can't happen when this motion is a motion where each side compares policy models in the first place. Secondly, they come up to the podium and talk about how athletes have a right to pursue passion. First of all, it does go against other rights to some extent, as they are physically harming others. And we believe that the right to be healthy, or the right to not have your bone broken, is more important than freedom of choice when actions threaten someone's safety. We can take this trade-off and still have unique benefits, as I will explain more in my extension. Additionally, as we have already told you, that we will spend time transitioning athletes into another job where they can still follow their passions, such as an MMA coach or an MMA TV show interviewer, for example, things like that. Third, They also talk about how people illegally pursue passions. We think that this is very under-mechanized because just because I have a passion for something doesn't mean I'll be willing to go to jail or be willing to even get the death penalty to some extent to just follow this passion, right? Also, why would you choose this illegal activity over our model of transitioning into another legal, well-paying job, right? We just think that opposition is very under-mechanized in their argument about illegally pursuing passions. Additionally, if the athletes really know what's best for them, they won't do illegal things, right? Because it's illegal. You're going to go to jail if caught. I don't think a passions is enough motivator to get them to do illegal things. They also ignore the fact that sports generally require large stadiums and crowd noises, and therefore it is likely that they are more easily detected by police and law enforcement regardless. And moving on to my two main points about first how opposition glorifies violence through competitions in principal aspect, and how fans and profit-driven companies turn it into a gladiator fight. First of all, what competitions look like in opposition's world. There's often a victor or an ultimate champion that emphasizes the fact that they went victorious over another individual. David already told you that these sports often end in injuries because of the competitiveness, especially in extreme sports such as UFC. Not only does injuries occur often, these injuries are jeered at and celebrated by the other side and team and by the audience. Sure, some competitions are not like this, but the major ones such as the UFC or WWE are very competitive. Second, framing what we support in terms of combat sports. Regular training, we believe, is fine, and as it focuses much more on discipline and personal training rather than hurting another or defeating another. Also, people can learn to self-defend if they choose to. This is the original purpose of martial arts that we intend to uphold. Third, framing now how combat sports glorifies violence through competitions. For all of them, there are winners and losers, and winners are generally those who inflict the most damage on the other, right? Essentially seeing who can last longer in a fight. Principally, this should not happen. Combat sports are a sport, but it makes it seem like punching someone in the head and knocking them out is something to be proud about. That almost breaking another person's arm is something to brag about, right? This is principally wrong, but also has practical harms. For example, children being influenced by the glorification of violence. Children who are fans of these sports, which most people are because they think it's cool. Because they see this so often, they will try to mimic as it is the natural nature of children, even to those who are older. Overall, society becomes prone to accepting glorified violence in their lives. We simply think that violence being a role model for kids or glorifying punching someone in the face for kids is not beneficial. Now, recapping all I said in my speech and throughout bench, David told you in his speech about the dangers of competitions. He told you that in UFC or MMA or in WWE, the number of casualties are off the charts. David also told you that regulations and soft stances of competitions often don't work, as people don't in the heat of the moment follow restrictions, especially in flight or fight. We also provided you with a model to the current boxers to new jobs such as PT or training boxers, etc., that provided a smooth transition into another job. We're also proud to be on proposition.
We have already stated repeatedly that athletes have chosen whether they would risk their own life and body to have a career that they could get paid a lot of money for. The government does not have the right to ban something that someone chose to do themselves, even if they could get hurt. So proud to oppose. And I'll add on to this later. Firstly, some reputations. So the DPM said that passion isn't enough to drive someone to make them do something illegal. So firstly, people get angry when something bad happens against them. They want to do something to make a stop or a protest, and I think this will cause a lot of backlash for the government, as I will add on later. And secondly, they talked about how children and other people will glorify violence. So our team thinks that this isn't happening as much in the status quo to be highly noticed in order to make a restriction. So we think that we should prioritize how the government will get backlash over this. So they also say that it's the government's duty to reduce harm. But as I said, changing to other sports wouldn't change anything, because as I will be adding into on my last argument, in your world, all types of contact sports will have to be either banned or heavily reduced, with changes that means changes the whole meaning and entertainment that all people are used to. So our team's last argument is about how it is not the government's duty to reduce this harm. So our last argument is about how it reduces the trust in the government. So when the government takes away one very important entertainment that is widely known, especially fans become increasingly scared that the government will take away other forms of entertainment, right? So going straight into the mechanism. For example, because combat sports are seen as too violent, that means that the government may have the incentive to ban all different types of contact sports, such as soccer and basketball, because there are chances that players can get injured, right? And having a society that has trust in the government is very important. So banning combat sports is most likely to reduce trust in the government because it is very popular, right? For example, the WWE is in the top 5 most subscribed channels in the entertainment base, which could contribute to other things. So, however, banning one of the top 5 terms of entertainment can make the society very imbalanced. Why is this true? The sports that they have loved has gone away, and even if there are other sports that they can somehow change to, this creates a societal fear that the government has too much power, as our first speaker said. Secondly, what is the likelihood of this? When people get something that they're so passionate about banned and taken away from themselves, of course they get angry. Their biggest source of entertainment is banned and taken away from them. Though there could be a likelihood that they would switch to other sports, this is very small, and this still causes a lot of lack of trust and fear that something else will get banned, which means that there would be a lot of bad energy in the world. And also because the government banned combat sports, now they feel the obligation to ban all extremely dangerous sports, right? The government themselves even stated that the government has a duty to ban these dangerous sports. However, they ignore how this duty may backfire. If the government has a duty to ban these dangerous sports, what is stopping them from banning all things such as American football? That all sports are in a sense dangerous. So the biggest impact for this argument is about backlash. I think both teams have the general idea that trust in the government is very important. Without the trust in the government, there will be backlash because A, the government control crumbles, and I think this is really important because the whole country and society operates on the government, right? And B, there will be a lot of protests that the government will most likely not be able to control with the lack of trust that they have. So on the comparative, with allowing society to engage in sports that they have chosen to love and enjoy, the government will not lose as much trust over a combat sport. So proud to oppose.
Going further from punching sandbags, kicking wooden blocks, and practicing self-defense, combat sports include sparring, fighting, and competing extremely physically in general. Since these competitions or sparrings lead to societal backlashes and the generation of casualties, so proud to propose. Now, moving on to rebuttals. They say that the athletes or boxers actually choose to, get injured or choose to pursue their passion of boxing or as a martial artist, right? First, as DPM addressed, we think that the health priorities are much more important in this case, since it is a much broader and much bigger impact, since it is actually threatening the athlete's health, safety, and life, possibly, right? Even if this is not true, these passions can be pursued in alternative ways, as aforementioned, such as a boxing coach, martial arts court manager, etc. Now, we also said that the government, we're going to use the FIA to actually support athletes to transition in these type of alternative ways, right? Now, even if cockfighting is someone's passion, we ban it simply because it causes irreparable harms harms, right? Now, when this harm is translated to people, we tell you that this is even more justified, right? Now, they say something about the government losing trust because they're going to ban all contact sports like soccer as well. But first of all, we want to say that the motion only talks about combat sports, meaning that it is going to be including martial arts, boxing, or actually sports that include physical fighting, right? Since soccer and basketball is a different case, since that is not the main goal of the sport, but accidental casualties can happen in everything. We think that the government will not likely have the incentive to ban all contact sports in which you're trying to kick a ball to a goal and someone might get hurt in that process, whereas combat sports are going to be banned because the main goal of these boxers or martial artists or these type of athletes are trying to defeat the other one actually by fighting and physically fist fighting and these kind of stuff, right? Now, let's move on to our clash. Which side promotes positive norms and impacts on individuals and societies? Now, what do these positive impacts look like? This looks like mutual impacts going to athletes and such actors towards societal impacts as well. Now, we think that the positive impacts addressed in here are going to be it's going to be really important since the society and individuals or athletes in which their principles or like their choices or their freedom of choices are actually all going to be recognized and talked about, right? Now, also, opposition turns combat sports into a competition where there is mockery, cheering audiences, and where KOing somebody is considered an achievement. Now, treating self-defense as a gladiator fight is not only principally wrong, but also leads to others learning from this, from exposure or following what they think is cool, right? This argument from the DPM was not refuted in the DLO and still stands in this debate. Now, knowing this, which side has more positive impacts? Now, judge, note that their side has no actual exclusive impacts, right? Even if we say and take the trade-off of WWE or these major fighting like programs getting banned and us having some backlash from these fans, this is not going to be long-lasting since these fans are not going to like die or their lives are ruined just because WWE is banned, right? Also, their side actually has no positive impacts gained on their side, since all they talk about is the importance of an athlete's choice and their autonomy, since that can also be somewhat pursued on our side as well, since we support their transitions to other jobs, including their passion, as we said, such as like a boxing coach or etc. Now, let's weigh our impacts here. On our side is more societal impacts and individual benefits too, since artists or these martial artists or athletes pursue their dreams first of all, but also do not get accidental casualties or are not injured, or we respect their safety, right? Also, we have societal benefits in which there's no positive or in which there's no negative norm of like this danger or this violence being glorified. This is why on our side, having much more exclusive impacts and negative impacts towards their side, we win this debate. Thank you.
Throughout time, it's been proven time and time again that fighting sports such as boxing are always popular and are always controlled. A lot of people are passionate about these sports because of competition, which is even shown through movies such as Rocky. Taking this away will not only make people lose passion, but also force them to give up their hobbies so proud to oppose. So moving straight into my clashes, all rebuttals integrated. So firstly, will people be able to pursue their passions, and will they be able to enjoy what they're passionate about, being fighting sports such as boxing and wrestling? So firstly, the side proposition claims that safety is ignored because people want to see violence and danger because they want to see danger and feel the shock. Okay, this is generally incorrect because firstly, I would like to say that the harm of people boxing in competitions is not like they're fighting to the death. Fighting sports are extremely regulated because of the fact that the danger is acknowledged by the people running them. In addition to that, the amount of people that get injured are outweighed by the amount of people who enjoy these sports. In addition to that, finally, the dangers are acknowledged by these athletes, and they are willing to take the risk. Therefore, your first argument crumbles. But we as side opposition said that we want people to be able to pursue their passion being fighting sports, because if we put a ban on fighting sports, then we are restricting people from doing what they want to do, which leads to less people being able to find new passions. So this generally makes more sense because, no, thank you. A majority of the population is passionate about fighting sports. Usually, most people get into fighting sports because they've seen a competition before. And that they will use these skills inside of competitions. If we get rid of these competitions, firstly, it directly reduces the amount of will that people have to watch or learn these fighting sports such as boxing, and also people will have to move into underground competition because of the fact that fighting sports are banned. And also you can't just say that like they're not going to just move into underground fighting, because we already know that they're illegal fighting like clubs, which is why they will probably move to underground. So then if they move to underground fighting, then firstly, this is clearly illegal, and secondly, there will be major backlash from the government because people want the rights to pursue passions. Secondly, will the government lose their trust? Will the people lose their trust in the government because of the fact that they think that the government will take over their other passions because of the risk? So firstly, side proposition claims that people have the rights to their safety and that athletes can move on to, if the if fighting sports get banned, they can move on to other jobs like becoming an MMA coach or something. So this is generally incorrect because let's just bite the bullet and assume that government is putting a full blanket ban on fighting sports. Say a specialized person, because usually fighters are specialized people who are trained to do these sports, and these fighting sports are the only things that they're good at and the only things that they know. How do you expect such specialized people to simply move on to different jobs such as being a coach? This simply doesn't work because in the end, these sports will lose all of their traction, which is why DPM's argument falls. But we as opposition said that combat sports are a big part of society, and if we get rid of them, we will overall reduce the trust in the government because they do not understand. No, thank you. Overtime, because they do not understand what the government will take over next or put a blanket ban on next. So this makes more sense overall because when the government takes something away that the people love, the people obviously grow to dislike the current government because of the fact that they don't know what will happen next or what will be banned next. So we can see this with a lot of different contexts. Take America banning, say, immigrants, for example. Because of this, now no one has trust in the government because they don't know what the government can do next because of the unpredictability. So because of a major change that the government is making, in addition to that, combat sports are highly enjoyed by people. Therefore, if they get taken away, people will lose their trust in the government due to the loss of what they love, leading to protests, major backlash, and crumbling control of the government. For these reasons, we take this debate. Thank you.
So there are two main flaws of side proposition. Firstly, they ignore the rights of athletes. The government thinks that athletes will abruptly change their whole life, how they get paid, how they support their own family just because the government bans it. The government assumes and expects the athletes to follow and support their incentives and policies. However, they have rights and opinions of their own, right? Who is the government to say these athletes are not allowed to pursue what they want and now are expected to transition according to their own plans? Side government keeps talking on and on about if the athlete is smart enough, they will choose not to go and do these sports illegally. However, they are likely to do this. Why? After the government takes away their core passion, these athletes won't want to do what the government says because the athletes are going to be mad and angry at the government, right? They are not just obedient. And ultimately, the government is treating the athletes like obedient dogs that are expected to do as they want and say, even though they have their own voice, their own opinion, right? On the other hand, we respect these athletes and see them as a mature adult that can make their own decisions and pursue their own passions, even if it means they're getting hurt because they chose to do this in the first place, right? The second flaw is they focus solely on athletes. They never focus on how this will truly affect society. How about the people who watch this? What will they do when their favorite form of entertainment will get banned? This will eventually cause backlash, right? So the main question we needed to answer in this debate was, how does banning combat sports have the immediate effect on society? So side government, the only thing that all three speakers talk about is how the athletes will be impacted. They say that they will get hurt, which we have already repeatedly refuted, as our third speaker said, right? And they touch on the point that the people who watch it will glorify violence, but firstly, parents can restrict the children from watching this. And also, our third speaker said that people who watch it are already aware of the violence. And of course, they won't glorify it because there are many stereotypes outside of these boxing matches. And we talked about how there will be so much backlash on the government, and this will just eventually be harmful for side government's world. And because of these reasons, side opposition takes this debate home.
Even if we claim our benefits to the most minimal extent, we still weigh over opposition because they have zero positive material. We are not saying that we get rid of their passion, rather we stop it from becoming a sport based on shock value and profit incentives. First I'm weighing, right? They talked about how the government will gain too much power and thus will try to ban other sports. But this doesn't make sense because, as we already told you, governmental power is justified enough to ban something that they believe is harmful, regardless of if people are passionate or not. Second, we have the fiat to ban combat sports, but if the government would want to ban other sports, they would have to go through legislation in Congress, which obviously would not work when they try to ban soccer, right? So currently we have the fiat to ban combat sports, but it just wouldn't work like if they try to ban soccer, so their point doesn't stand. Second, on their argument of backlash. First, the intensity of backlash won't be severe enough to bring down or severely weaken on government. And second, they didn't tell us the grounded impact of backlash, because over time we tell you that audiences have no choice but to switch to other sports. Even if backlash is strong to some extent, we are willing to trade this off because again, backlash is short term and it is not like strong enough to bring down a government. Like just like how bare knuckle boxing was banned before, we tell you that like society will move on and the backlash will decrease eventually, right? We prioritize the safety of individuals and societies because, as Jason and I already told you in my first speech, there's a higher likelihood that it promotes violence, i.e., to children, which there was no response yet. And second, we structurally stop the casualties that are happening on purpose due to shock value and profit incentives, like for example on those like sports in which there was no response to their side. Third, on a less important but still important issue on underground fighting. We would like to ask why these athletes would want to do illegal fighting if they know what's best for them and what suits them best, right? And why would they choose to fight underground when they have an easy route to become a PT coach or self-defense coach as stated in our model? And also there's no response yet to this, right? So government has no right to stop athletes from pursuing dreams, but which is why we're supporting these athletes to do other jobs which is with the same passion, like for example like boxers into boxing coaches. Even if this is not true, this means that their side only has an argument on like the athlete's principles, while our side has societal and more individualized impacts such as safety and respecting positive norms within society. Instead of just trying to please people with shock value and profit incentives, we protect like society. We protect the mindsets of society overall. I'm so proud to propose.